are so many aspects, and this is clearly social re-engineering which is happening, Sushantji. And sometimes you look at this entire aspect of geostrategy as a game of chess and 64 squares, and suddenly you realize that you got to go back and say it's 128, and that the square that you thought was the main chessboard was just one. What you thought was the main chessboard was perhaps just one small square in a far greater game. You realize that how they are over decades using drugs, trying to make and render or incapacitate what was the catchment area for us as soldiers, the fighting force. So if you look at it, Kashmir, on Nepal, Gorkha region, northeast, the Ahoms, the Marathas, the Punjabis, the Sikh, the Dogra, Jammu, and then Kerala, the Nair force, all of them. So you are wiping out the fighting force and also trying to subdue the instinct for the country and to stand up for the motherland, and that is using drugs. Then this is the migrant population which goes, Sushantji, which going abroad, where you try and alienate them from the culture that they came from, feed them misinformation, and then try and reorient them, re-engineer them in such a way that they'll go back as vultures and prey on that very country which is the root of their origin.
So Anand, this is a project which started almost 100 years back, with this whole Gurdwara movement. Very often people forget, all the sinister plots that the British or the British Raj, and the viruses which the British Raj planted out here. And subsequently, this has grown, the Pakistanis latched onto it in the 70s, and then what you saw was the Khalistan movement. There were there is no dearth of criminals in Punjab. The Pakistanis latched onto them, plied them with money, and all of that can be very well, it has been very well documented. But we are a people, we are not a serious country, India, and we forget our history very fast. We don't correct the fallacious history which is taught to us, because there are pamphleteers who prance about as historians. Nobody has ever tried to correct the perceptions in Punjab on the nonsensical history which is taught in our schools. Nobody has ever tried to correct it about how this whole Gurdwara movement started, what was behind it, and how it kind of tried to drive a kind of a wedge between the Hindu and the Sikh community. And Mr. Sen's, Dr. Sen's article today has very well put it, that now you have reached a situation, no matter how much you try, the radical or the hardline element among the Sikh community is simply not willing to accept what you are saying, that there is absolutely no difference between Hindu and Sikhs. The Sikh religion, in fact, if you look at it, emanates from the Hindu faith or the Sanatan Dharma, but all of that is besides the point now. Today you have a situation where I actually fault my own government and my own state, and we should not be shy of pointing out the mistakes we have made. Appeasement never helps. Okay. And let me tell you, Mr. Modi has really reached out to the Sikh community, because as Dr. Sen himself writes in his article, he actually believes in it. He actually, subscribed to the Panth, all of that. But, a lot of the blacklists were removed. It gave an open door to these fellows. None of them had reformed. It gave them an open door to come out here and spread their propaganda. Number one. Number two, we have seen Punjab going to dust. In the last 15 to 20 years, Punjab has actually deteriorated as a place. It was the most progressive state, one of the most prosperous states in India. And look at it, it's a wasteland today, virtually a wasteland. And anybody who says that that is not the case, shame on him. Because this was a state which should have had the highest per capita income today. This should have been right at the edge of, it should have actually broken out in terms of development. But it's suffering from a narcotics epidemic. You have, and one parameter on which you decide this, how bad the situation is, how the younger generation in that state is voting with its feet. There are entire channels which are being run trying to promote, an exodus out of Punjab to go to Canada, Australia, or any of these places. They will most probably go out there and be taxi drivers, right? But that is what is being promised to them. So the entire new generation is voting with its feet. Nobody finds a future in Punjab anymore. Now, this is a situation we have allowed to fester, we have allowed to continue. Then, on the administrative side, look, my point is a simple one, where I will join issue with Dr. Sen. The Pakistanis are funding money. Are the Pakistanis richer than India? Can we not do it? Is the Pakistani diaspora bigger than India's diaspora? The Indian diaspora is wealthier, it is more populated, it is a lot more influential in academics, in every which field. And yet, like Tariq Fateh, our friend, says, that they are more interested in becoming CEOs rather than doing even the slightest thing for their own country.
Correct.
Now, if supposing you consolidated the Indian diaspora, isn't that a bigger voting bloc, whether it is Canada, Australia or UK?
Yeah.
What about Germany? Today, you cracked the whip. So you got the Germans to do something. Otherwise, the Germans have been allowing the Khalistanis to operate out there for almost a decade now, even longer.
Yeah.
We very often take our eye off the ball and say, no, nothing is happening in Europe, mainland Europe. But Germany is one of the hubs for the Khalistani movement. And what have we done about it? Today we cracked the whip, so we got them to move on something. But why have we been sleeping on the wheel?
Correct.
Why have we not been looking at this problem? And we've taken our eye off the ball. So yes, the enemies of India will do what the enemies of India will do. But the protectors of India also need to do what they need to do.
Exactly.
And I think that is where we have been lacking.
I totally agree.
Can I make a comment on this, please?
I totally agree. Yes, Gautam Senji, and I'll come back, go back to Panditji and also General Katoch after you. Yes, Ji.
I do completely agree with Sushantsareen on the question of our failure to provide an alternative narrative. This is not just with respect to the Punjab. I'm an academic and I'm deeply familiar and distressed by the fact that we have not been able to generate an alternative narrative which is closer to the truth. In the case of Punjab, this is especially serious because others have run away with this narrative. And the history that is taught is totally false. History that is repeated to me by my Sikh friends are totally false. Now, as for the Indian diaspora, I'm sorry, I know this diaspora very well. There is no hope. These people operate as individuals for their own interests. Indian students in Oxford joined with Pakistani students to protest against the CIA. The same story at SC, School of Oriental Africa Studies, or anywhere you care to mention. Indians are not with our country. Very, very few Indians abroad side with their country, particularly in social science academia. What we need to do is low cost, requires determination, and there is no shortage of talent to start creating the alternative narrative about our past, Punjab especially. This is where we are failing. And I'm afraid that Pakistan may not be rich, but they have to focus on one issue, it is India. India has to focus on many, many issues, many countries. I would say India is spending money, a lot of money, much more than Pakistan, but not very wisely. They're spending it on growing wheat and rice, for which they have no use.
No, you're being very candid. Yes, Sushantji, I have limited time, so I'd like to go back to the other guest too. Yes, please.
I'll just say a sentence or two. Look, the problem again on this lies in India. Have you seen the kind of social studies nonsense which is taught in our schools? But I could have an entire program with you. You have actually created a generation of deracinated Indians who then go abroad and hate their country and work against this country's interests. What do you expect? And
Panditji,
this government takes pride in the fact that it hasn't changed the curriculum.
No, I agree.
Can you imagine that?
No, I agree.